Hello, everyone. Welcome to Global Express. This is the new Indian Express's weekly video series on India and its neighborhood. Do click on the new Indian Express website and watch the episode. So, days before India hosts the G20 summit and leaders from across the world, including US President Joe Biden, Prime Minister of the UK, Rishi Sunak, French President Emmanuel Macron, and even the South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol arrive in Delhi, China looks as if it's thrown a huge spanner in the works. It's being described as cartographic aggression by a whole host of countries, not just India, but Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and the Philippines, and Taiwan, of course, but not Russia. China says it's released a standard map, when in fact, is it standard at all? It's not even the 9-dash line, it's now the 10-dash line to the east of Taiwan and includes Russian island Bolshoi Ussuriski in the far northeast corner of China as an island at the confluence of the Amur and Ussuri rivers. And both Russia and China had agreed, nearly 20 years ago to split the island. So given the Russia-China axis, there's not a peep out of Moscow. India, however, has lodged a formal protest. Foreign Minister Jaishankar has dismissed the map as absurd. It's an old habit of theirs, he says. They are habitual offenders. China has asked India to keep calm and not over-interpret. So just to give our viewers a little background on why there's more to the map than maybe meets the eye, the map shows part of eastern Ladakh as per the rejected 1959 line. It shows Aksai Chin, which China occupied in the 62 war, and Arunachal Pradesh, which China claims is part of southern Tibet as part of China, the so-called Middle Kingdom. Then there is the timing. It seems a little suspect. It's come after the pull-aside at BRICS between our Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Chinese President Xi Jinping, which China insists was at India's behest. India says otherwise. A Global Times report mentions how India is the only country to challenge China's domination. And that it continuously connects its border disputes to China's proposals at the recent SCO and BRICS summits. So it also comes just before the ASEAN summit and G20, which Delhi hosts on September 9th. Now, Xi looks as if he is likely to skip G20. So to discuss the implications of this map mischief, as I'm calling it, is former ambassador to China, Ashok Kantha, who served as Secretary East to the Ministry of External Affairs, was High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, served in Hong Kong and Kathmandu. He is now a distinguished fellow at the Vivekananda International Foundation. He reads Chinese better than most. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you.
Also with us is the perceptive Lieutenant General Prakash Menon, who's Director of Strategic Studies at Takshashila Institution, a professor at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, and the first military advisor at the National Security Council Secretariat. 40-year Army vet. He's had extensive operational experience, served as company commander on the Siachen Glacier and the line of control in Kashmir and Kargil. Welcome, General Menon. Also with us is Dr. Nithiyanandam, a professor, head of the Geospatial Research Program at Takshashila. He's got a doctorate in remote sensing. The professor therefore brings to the table an astute interpretation of satellite imagery, cutting-edge advancements in remote sensing, and now the nation's defense organization are tapping his geospatial acumen, as he calls it. So let's start with you, Ambassador Kantha. You must have seen this many times before, especially as China says it's a map that it releases every year, that it is no different from its earlier maps. Would you say it's more a not so subtle messaging about the state of India-China relations? Because what is it behind, the timing looks a little suspect. Was it designed to create the tension that will give Xi Jinping a perfect excuse not to be at this event where India will be the belle of the ball? The world's leaders will garner all the attention, not Xi, as he did at the recently concluded BRICS summit in South Africa. And how much credence should we give to reports that China has miffed, that Xi wanted a bilateral with India at BRICS, to arrive at a normalization without conceding even an inch of territory, with no agreement on the Depsang Bulge or Demchok in eastern Ladakh. So what are we looking at? Is it, we're not getting disengagement, we're not getting the de-escalation. Where are we with India and China, the India-China relations at this point, Ambassador?
Neena, put it very bluntly, we are not in a happy place when it comes to India-China relations. Coming specifically to the map you referred to, the so-called standard map of China released on 28th August, it's not a routine map. It's true that international boundaries of China, as shown in the map, are not that different from earlier maps. But as you cited, External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar is saying that China is a habitual offender. I'll add to that by saying that China is a serial offender. It has an insatiable appetite for other countries' territories. It keeps showing, territories belonging to other countries as part of its own in its maps. And what makes matter more serious is that it's not just a pro forma depiction of territory, but it backs up with action on the ground. Look at India-China borders. You referred to Aksai Chin. You're aware of how Aksai Chin was occupied by China during the run-up to the 1962 conflict and during 1962 conflict. You're aware of recent developments in Eastern Ladakh, where beginning April-May 2020, China has tried to change status quo at multiple locations. And to some extent, it's managed to do so. It's describing Arunachal Pradesh as southern Tibet, as you mentioned, Chungnan. So it's maintaining its claim on that area. Likewise, in other theaters, you referred to other countries who have protested against China's new map, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam, and Taiwan. In all these cases, China unilaterally projects certain territories and then takes action on the ground to change facts there. You're aware of what has happened in South China Sea, the so-called 9-dash line, how China created artificial islands, how China militarized those islands, and China is trying to make South China Sea into China's inland water, its lake, which is something not acceptable to other countries. So there is this pattern of behavior we have to take note of. Second thing I would like to point out, that while China advises us not to overinterpret action, I would like them to recall their behavior after we made certain changes in Jammu and Kashmir,
Article 370.
Article 370 and bifurcation of Jammu and Kashmir into two union territories. You'd recall kind of a very strident response we saw from China, even though no changes were made in our external boundaries as a result of those developments, which are purely in domestic domain. At that time, China had no problem, raising the temperature in the issue. And now it's advising us that we should not overinterpret the matter. The very fact that it's not only India which has protested, but so many other countries have strongly contested China's new map shows that there is a widespread anxiety about certain pattern of behavior on part of China, which is leading to increase in tension in different theaters.
Yeah.
And coming
to
your question on
what about yes, exactly.
Yeah. Your question on Xi Jinping's visit. So far, no, we don't have any official confirmation that he will not be coming to New Delhi for G20 summit. But indeed, as media reports suggest, if he doesn't come, this will be a very negative signal, both in context of our bilateral relations with China. This will convey to the people of India and to the world at large that India-China relations are going through a rough patch and indeed are moving in a downward spiral. Likewise, on the issue of G20, the message will be that China doesn't attach significance to G20, a summit which we are hosting with a great degree of preparation and enthusiasm. you're aware that on all previous occasions since becoming president in 2013, Xi Jinping has been attending G20 summit. He was in Johannesburg for 15th BRICS summit. If he doesn't come to New Delhi for G20 summit this time, clearly it will message both in context of India-China relations and to G20 as a whole.
That's very interesting. General Menon, if I could come to you. So at this point, with Xi Jinping, sort of playing hot and cold with India, you are a great advocate of engagement with China. You've said that, even though India and China have held talks over 6 days at the level of their lieutenant generals and major generals, and in the past we've had disengagements along the LAC, we've had buffer zones, we've had both nations stopping patrolling, but this time we haven't had any progress at all. Similarly, this conversation between Xi and the Prime Minister at Bali is supposed to have yielded something. I'm not clear what. And the latest in Johannesburg has led to this impasse. So why are you an advocate? I mean, why do you believe we should keep talking? Because, in every single article that you see that is coming out of the Global Times, India is portrayed as the adversary. Its links with Quad, its links with the United States, with AUKUS +2, that's Japan and South Korea, with Quad. We don't seem to be, really making progress. But the US, very interestingly, has sent 4 of its top officials to China, and the UK has broken with a 5-year hiatus and sent its Foreign Secretary James Cleverly. What should Delhi be doing going forward? Should we continue this process of talks, or what should we do?
The point is, and why I say that we should be talking is, that is a better way of settling differences. And this is a banal statement, and there's a diplomat here who would probably say no, and not say, I don't want to talk to you because we have problems. I mean, I don't think that's a mature way. I took most populous countries in the world to shout out their differences. So there is no point, though that the Chinese style of talking and negotiation, especially when they are at an advantage, where they have taken what they really want, and therefore makes them to sit in let's say, a tactically superior position to you, is therefore to drag on the talks, wear you down. And what my main point about the talks which have been taking place, the 19th military commanders talks have just taken place, between lieutenant generals. Then there was 2 major generals talking to their counterparts on either side. In fact, officially, it has not been admitted as yet that the major generals actually had their talks. Only an anodyne statement came out of the lieutenant generals' talks. So the point at issue here is that so far, as we assess where we are, the Chinese have actually managed to get the better of us by actually getting us to adopt this notion or concept of buffer zone, which advantages them for the simple reason that it's like they have taken 2 steps forward, and through negotiations have finally
pushed us back.
To take 1 step backward. So 1 step is still in with them. So this is the problem with the buffer zone. But there was another issue, I think, which we need to say. The Chinese actually launched into all serious conversations between political leaders and the military only after we occupied the Kailash range in August 2020. Till then, they had actually refused to talk, except for the de-escalation talks in Galwan and so on, which followed. But they had refused to talk to resolve any issue. They were actually blaming us for all the aggression that they have done. We were supposed to be the aggressors. They were supposed to be the victims. But once Kailash happened is when they actually started the talks. But
who had Kailash before that, General?
It is unoccupied.
Oh, I see.
But it is in territory which is ours. It overlooks the vital area of the south bank of the Pangangso. Chinese would be very uncomfortable with that. But this is what happened.
Is that where we've built a road? The actual road G, whatever it's called?
We have built a road up to Razangla, which is actually one of the places where we fought the famous battle. Like, there's a Kumaoni battalion which defended it to the last man, 19 Kumau. And that's an area which actually gives us an advantage and overlooks the southern bank of the Pangangso, where a lot of forces of the Chinese are concentrated. So the point at issue is, when we agreed to the talks, there was movement, let's say, on north bank of the Pangangso, the finger area. There was movement. We immediately de-escalated there or disengaged there, but they said they will talk about Gogra hot springs and the rest later. But the point was, the moment we agreed to that and we came back from Kailash, they went back to their famous tactic. Even Gogra hot springs took their own time to resolve. And here again, it was 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards. And Depsang and CNN Junction or Demchok remained. They said, I mean, this is all old stuff. We really don't need to talk to them. But now it seems that the progress which one can spot is, at least there is, the talks have begun about both these areas. That's the only point. That's the only point which we, and if the reports on the major generals having met the two division commanders, then obviously there is some sort of movement there, but we don't know how, since it has not been officially accepted. So one of the lessons we take away from here is that the Chinese, when they get to a position of advantage, will negotiate with you in a manner that some portion of that advantage is retained. That's what they have attempted and succeeded so far. We need to learn the lesson from that. I mean, after all, if you look back at Doklam, I mean, what have the Chinese done? After all, we had an agreement to disengage from the scene of where the blockade.
That clash happened. Yeah.
Only there.
Yeah. Oh.
Once that happened, you can look at all the satellite photographs of the Doklam Plateau. They have completely militarized it. They've strengthened themselves. And of course, Bhutan is now talking. So we are in an awkward position.
Yes, absolutely.
So the question is, we know the Chinese, and I'm sure the people like the ambassador, who's actually had so much, are we negotiating them with the experience that we have had historically with the Chinese? Are we doing that?
So basically, we should negotiate with Chinese.
Are we putting ourselves against a time wall?
Yeah.
So now G20 is happening, so we must get some movement here. So at least Xi Jinping will come. I think that is a wrong tactic. That is not how you deal with the Chinese. After all, don't forget that even the Doklam agreement was back to the ball with the meeting which was supposed to take place. So we need to learn that lesson. Whether Xi Jinping comes to for G20 or not, it is both a bilateral issue. It also shows the widening gulf between China and the US-led West. I mean, that is the basic issue is. And after all, so is Putin not coming? And there was I don't see there was any danger of Putin being arrested in India when he came, because there was a lookout notice for him. That was not going to happen.
Yeah,
so with these two leaders, therefore, not coming, and I don't quite connect the timing of the map and so on. They had probably made this decision some time back. Must have been obvious to people who know within our government itself. They know that to puncture the Indian ego on G20 of wanting to chair it without these two leaders is probably a deliberate attempt by China. I mean, that's all we have to show us. So we need to know what the nature of the Chinese is. I mean, not about the Chinese Communist Party is. And that is why we need to play the game accordingly. There is no way that we need to be worried about the fact that the Chinese are talking but not giving way. After all, if you look at what was happening in Sumdrongchu, it dragged on for so many this thing. When some point came, yeah, we will agree. So patience, I think, is the name of the game. Let not domestic politics and its pulls intervene in how India's diplomats and military leaders handle this issue and the political leaders. I don't think that equation should be put into that, because then we will be at a disadvantage.
That's very well said. Thank you.
Can I just step in?
Yes. Yes.
General Menon has made some very important points. And in fact, I would like to reiterate many good points he has made. Number one, importance of keep talking. I think China is the largest neighbor. We need to manage a very difficult and complex relationship. So there's no alternative to talking to them. We should never stop communication channels. But where do we talk? How do we talk? What kind of objectives do we set for these discussions? I think that becomes very important. For one thing, as General Menon mentioned, we should never put any artificial deadlines that summit meetings are coming up. We must arrive at some settlement. So for Xiamen summit of BRICS, there was pressure to bring about some kind of resolution of Doklam standoff. And as General Menon mentioned, it didn't quite help us, because we might have brought about a disengagement temporarily, but Chinese have managed to entrench their positions in Bhutan in the aftermath of what happened in 2017. Likewise, dealing with China now, we need to show strategic patience. We should not go for quick fix. I think it's extremely important. We have a lot of experience of dealing with China. So it's not that we are novice when it comes to engaging with Chinese diplomats or Chinese military. But we must avoid, trying to arrive at early settlement at the expense of our long-term interests.
That's very interesting.
A buffer zone may be as a temporary measure to bring about disengagement to troops. One can argue that it was useful, but it should be seen only as a temporary expedient. We should keep pushing for restoration of status quo ante as of April-May 2020. Patrolling rights of Indian troops must be restored, whether it is in the Gogra hot spring area or Galwan Valley or Demchok or in Depsang Plains. In all those areas, we must restore. I think that objective should not be lost sight of.
That's very well put.
Then one more point I would like to make, where do we engage? As a negotiator, someone who was involved in these talks for a long time, General Menon referred to our patience in dealing with the Bangtung incident, standoff or close confrontation at Chinese in Sumdrongchu Valley and Namkhachu Valley. Chinese had taken extremely strident position at that time in 86, 87. In fact, they had conveyed a message to us that there could be armed conflict, but we stood our ground.
Really?
It took us 9 years to bring about disengagement. And I happened to be the negotiator from our side for that engagement. And we didn't concede anything. We didn't accept any of the Chinese demands. And Chinese finally had to give in and accept our position. Likewise, in 2014, in case of standoff in Demchok and Chumar, at that time also I was tasked to negotiate disengagement. Our position is very clear. You need to return to status quo ante as of 1st September 2014. We didn't discuss anything else. And they agreed. Finally, they agreed. I think need to take a clear position, not look at quick fix solutions and showing the staying power. I think that's very important in our negotiations. And I'm also a little worried about, sort of putting this burden on our border commanders to discuss our disengagement, de-escalation.
So you're saying it shouldn't be done just by the military alone?
No. traditionally, it has always been a composite delegation consisting of diplomats and military officials, led by diplomats. And that had served us well because, after all, you're looking at matters that impact sovereignty and territorial.
Yes.
If we concede ground in these negotiations, it affects our territorial control. So I'm not really comfortable with delegating these negotiations only to border commanders. So they should be taken back.
Who would took that kind of decision to limit
No, I
it
don't.
to?
I'm not privy to those
Yeah.
decisions. But as someone who was involved with these negotiations for an extended period in different capacities, we always insisted in the past that these delegations should be composite, including
Very interesting.
diplomatic and military officials.
Yes, fabulous. I mean, I'm learning such a lot, Ambassador. Can we turn to the professor? The other worrying aspect, Professor, of the map is the satellite imagery that you have written about. You've shown the Chinese deployment of military radars in Tibet. And it you say that impacts India's combat readiness. And you're saying that, this China has amped up its surveillance, its reconnaissance, its target detection, its tracking of inbound missiles, aircraft. This is a whole new kind of warfare. And is it limited only to Tibet is what I wanted to know. Does India have the satellite technology to track what's happening in the rest of the area? I mean, you say there's a surface-to-air missile site near the southern bank of Pangong Tso Lake, next to the national highway, G219, 219. You've said there have been radar beams interference in Aksai Chin and other spots. And you've also said that you've tracked these for a short period. Could you tell us a little bit more about it? I mean, this Chinese movement, how can we stop their ingress into Bhutan, the Indian state of Sikkim?
Yeah, sure. So this is about an article we have written in our Geospatial bulletin, in which we started writing about the things happening, and we are monitoring with the help of geospatial data sets. Some are open source, and mostly we observe it with the help of satellite data sets on things which affects the India strategic affairs. So in a recent article, we looked at the military radar installations possibly on ground exist in Tibet region that we haven't looked at through a conventional radar fingerprinting process, because in a conventional radar fingerprinting process, people try to see its the kind of signals that we are getting out from the radars, and people look for evidences from space in case if it is anti-missile site, surface-to-air missile sites, and so on. People try to see its pattern from a high-resolution satellite imagery. That is the usual process people apply while looking at the potential radars on ground. Whereas what we have attempted is we have looked at the interferences pattern which is being created by the existence of this radar on ground with respect to the satellite imageries, which is based on synthetic aperture radars, which are actually created for some other purpose. It is created for disaster management. It is created for monitoring marine activities. It is created for looking at changes on surface, especially landslide, flood, and so on. So there's an unusual
But China is
pattern.
not using any of this for that, clearly.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is a satellite data which is built for some other purpose. We used it and applied algorithms which exist on open source platform to see where the interferences patterns are created. Those interferences patterns are unique and which is uncommon in other places. So for say, if you look at its interferences with weather radars for say, so the weather radars and this satellite radar has a different set of interferences. Whereas the military radars, which operates in a X-band frequency mostly, has a commonality with the C-band civilian radar. Thus, we get that pattern which is unique and it spreads across different regions in the Tibet. So what we have
So
observed
what have you found? What have you found with that?
Yeah.
What is the information
So
that you've gleaned?
Yeah, we have used a data set from 2017 till 2023, and we have observed there are patterns in which they operate. Let's say in a particular date or a particular period, the radars are operated in an upper part of the places where close to Ladakh, the things were happened in the past. Whereas a more
Mm.
intense activity of radar monitoring is being happening in the area which is close to Arunachal Pradesh and area which is close to Doklam. So there is a shift.
Ah.
There's one thing is a shift in the operation of this, and the second is what we observed is wherever the interference pattern exists, there are two sets of pattern. I could say the three categories of pattern. One is the very high intense radars, which could be possibly the radar signal emitted from a strong ground based radar, which the patterns are bigger and it is longer. It can go up to 100 plus kilometers for monitoring. Whereas the other pattern, which is in the range of 80 kilometers, probably and 80 kilometers, and the other one is of 20 to 30 kilometers. These are all probably coming from small radars, which are part of either the SAM sites or part of the anti-missile trucks, the radar systems which they have, mobile ones. Those are coming close to the roads, and some are operated along the road. That's what I specified. Most of the signals that we get either falling on this highway somewhere. So there is a
Hmm.
very high chance these radars would have operated while they are exercising it, or while they are moving troops from one place to another place, and so on. And this is not like all the patterns are not observed every time at places. It has been shifting in the different places of Tibet, and more interestingly, we could able to see interferences pattern on an area where there is no settlement, there is no military activity on the ground in high resolution imagery, but still you can see there is a radar pattern exist on that
So
area.
what is
That
the conclusion you draw, that it is underground? Do they have
Yes.
bases
So
underground?
whenever these kind of activities, these kind of pattern exist, that is a potential underground facility exist on that area,
And this
and that
underground
is
facility
confirmed.
would be missiles or aircraft, or what would they be?
It could be
Or
anything,
troops?
but yeah, it could be anything. But as of now, what we could see is the one good correlation found is in the Akshay, where at the time we were releasing, at the same time there was a report on high resolution satellite data sets which exposes the potential underground facilities in Akshay just below the mountain foothills and so on. So that's exactly the same area. We do got a fringe, we do got a pattern which is crossing over that area, which says like that is used for either protecting their own assets at places. It also used to protect their the urban areas, the cities like Sigatse, Laja, and so on. So these are the ways in which the radar systems has been used in different ways at different periods, at different intensities, more importantly, because the
Yeah, yeah.
extent has increased over time. It is not like any particular place it is operated for a monitoring of 100 kilometers. It is sometime operated
Mm.
for 10 kilometers, sometime extended for 100 kilometers. Some are the dates in which they operated are matching relevance with the events which are happening. There are dates which are closer to what happens with the India, in especially in Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh region in a particular period. So you can find there is at that particular period for the next 3 months, there was an intense activity on that. And more importantly, what we have identified and what we have shown is a very limited number of radars which we could find it. But there are numerous radar signals which are there. For the sake of writing, we haven't exposed all of that. We've written only the major
But
radars
Professor,
which
do we
has a
have do
bigger
we have
impact.
a counter? Do we have a counter radar? Can we monitor what's happening across the border in China? Do we have the technology? Because I read somewhere that the Israelis had given us technology, and the US had given us technology. Is that
So
still pertinent?
yeah, so there are a lot of air-based radar systems are there to monitor this, and there are counter radar systems exist in India to monitor it. But unfortunately, when it comes to space-based system, let's say we have used an European Space Agency data to do it, and similarly, if you want to do with an Indian-based system, I believe the RISAT one, which had a similar kind of bands, which are now not in functioning, and but then we can use another technology. Technology is open, capability is available. The only challenge is even with the data sets from Indian Space Research Organization, should be opened to a certain community for playing around it, for developing algorithms, and to use it something which is a non-civil, non-military guys can also develop. So that
So,
is
General,
required.
if I can just turn to the General. General, you've served in Siachen, you said, in Kargil. And, as the professor has said, there must be some route to counter these Chinese fortifications, which are now come up overground and underground. Do we really have that manpower? Do we have the technical expertise? I mean, China has ramped up the construction of underground bunkers, overground bunkers in Aksai Chin, not far from the line of actual control, all within an area of 15 square kilometers. So, and the latest pictures are now showing us underground bunkers at 6 locations, all connected underground. China's building airfields. So, what is it? The Indian Air Force apparently has an aerial advantage. I mean, it's got its own missiles there, and it has an air force in Ladakh. But are we ready? Is to counter this new Chinese strategy in Ladakh, in Kargil, and the Siachen Glacier militarily?
Yes. Actually, let's just look at what the Chinese are up to, in the sense that this development of infrastructure, of communications and military facilities started at the turn of the 2010s, just a couple of years before and after. And that's been ongoing. It has speeded up in recent years, and it's continuing not only opposite Ladakh, it's also across the
Line of
Sino-Indian.
control.
So the question is, all this is part of either communication facilities, which means you have roads and bridges, and the underground facilities, which you actually are asking us. The military, because of the fact that you don't have any cover, has to protect, conceal, and deceive. All can be done at the same time, or some of them can be done. Now, therefore, the very fact that they have this, I'm 100% sure that wherever it's been done, we have a good idea about it, and we have the capability to find that out. That is not the issue. The question you're asking is, do you have the capability, once you have the knowledge, to target it? Of course we do. That's what the Indian Air Force, that's what our missile systems are there for. After all, these are permanent assets. You can't hide them the way that you normally do. Sometimes you have to move things out of it. Some of these tunnels are actually connected underground. They can do this thing. But for usage of those military systems, you have to bring them out. And so the point is, you just mentioned about the Indian Air Force. When we talk about Chinese military power, I think we need to keep one issue in mind. Military power, especially, it's okay to China to tell everybody comprehensive national power in absolute terms, 5 times more budget, all that is fine. But when it comes to combat capability, it's about relative power, the amount of power, military power you can bring to bear relatively at that point in time and place. And when we look at that, there is the superiority of the Chinese, and especially with us defending the mountains, cannot be discounted. And also the fact that we have much more experience in high altitude in serving in those terrains that the Chinese have. And also, they don't have the infantry capability to launch an offensive across the Himalayas, hold ground. They don't even want to do it because that is not their political objective. Their political objective is about what I had written in my article, is about pressure points or pinch points. They need to fight here and there. They have never launched an attack against any of us, except, of course, the brawl which took place in Galwan. That I think nobody had actually planned it out. It happened. And when military forces are in contact, this is what Clausewitz described as friction. Anything can happen. But the point is, they only occupy territory which, according to the agreement, they were supposed to come and go back. Now they came, never did go back. So this is their style. And once they sit there, what we are seeing now, and this is the point which we have to note, the type of infrastructure, the living accommodation which has come up to support these troops gives us a very clear idea that the Chinese have come to stay. They are not
Yes.
going to go back.
Yeah.
And that is why our negotiation should also keep this in mind. This will happen next time. It can probably happen anyway, either in the middle sector or in the northeast. They don't have to do much. The length of the border gives them enough time or enough place to go and sit. What we should do is not to attack them, but we do what we did with the Kailash range. We do a quid pro quo, and we need to do it immediately. Kailash range was done in August. It should have been done much earlier, because the decision making, probably it would have been left to the diplomats. After all, we initially said this is normal, it has happened, got a little intensive, it'll be okay. But it's only when we realized that that's not the game that the permission was given to occupy Kailash range, which the Indian Army did with great style and effort. So I think what we are seeing here about infrastructure tells us they're here to stay. They will when they think the time is appropriate, send us the message. That message will be the military instrument saying and occupying that much. I mean, after all, it's been described as salami sighting. That is just
I was just going to say we should adopt their salami slicing. Yeah, that's very good. That's very interesting. Ambassador, if I can come to you, could you take us through the previous bilateral agreements? I mean, I believe we've had one in 1993 and 1996. We've got peace and tranquility agreements. And from what I understand, from what I've read up, I believe parts of Aksai Chin were occupied by Chairman Mao Zedong before the 1962 war. So when India was actually signing the Panchsheel agreement in 1954, China was building a highway that linked occupied Tibet with occupied Xinjiang through Aksai Chin. So our acceptance of this, occupation of Tibet was a Himalayan blunder. Should we borrow from the Chinese tactics and go public now with our own boundary claims, our own map? Should we do apart from the military move that General Menon's talking about, should we also adopt their tactics to embarrass the Chinese, saying this is the land we occupy and you can't get it? It's on our map.
Neena, as far as projecting our position is concerned, that is being done by us quite categorically. We have made it very clear in our maps what's the international boundary between India and China. So on that, there is no lack of clarity on our part. But before I come to confidence building measures that have been put in place, let me just offer some comments, building on points made by General Menon. First, this very important point that we should not get unduly psyched by the fact that there is an asymmetry in comprehensive national strengths of India and China, that the economy is 5 times larger than ours, that the defense budget is more than 4 times bigger than ours. What matters, as General Menon rightly pointed out, is the ability of two sides to bring to bear our forces at specific locations along India-China LAC, and there we are not so badly off. I think this we have to keep in mind. So we need not adopt an unduly defensive stance vis-a-vis China, as we tend to at times. At the same time, we must acknowledge, as a result of recent developments, what has happened in Eastern Ladakh since April-May 2020, facts on the ground have been changed to our disadvantage. That many places that were patrolling earlier, we are unable to access now. Our graziers are not getting access to the traditional grazing grounds.
Yes.
We had a sort of new normal along India-China borders, which we should not accept. I think we should be very clear, as I mentioned earlier, that buffer zones are at best temporary expedient, that we must go back to status quo. And that's not going to be easy at all. But we should show their staying power. We should play the long game. We should show strategic patience when it comes to our dealings with China. At the same time, we must also acknowledge that there is a huge and growing gap in border infrastructure of India and China. I have traveled quite a bit, both in Tibet and Xinjiang, and I have seen for myself, kind of capabilities they have built. While we are catching up, but we are still well behind China. And China's what they have done in recent past, they have really enhanced their capability not only to induct additional troops, but to maintain these troops through winter months under very harsh conditions.
Yes.
Be in no hurry to de-induct. In fact, when we talk about the de-induction of forces, we should go back to Article 3 of Agreement on Confidence Building Measures between India and China, signed in 1996, which lays down what should be parameters for de-induction of forces. It must take into account the nature of terrain, time taken to de-induct forces, and border infrastructure, as specifically provided for in Article 3 of the 1996 agreement. These are complex issues. They will take time, but an unduly offensive stance will not help us. So I agree with General Menon that we must have quid pro quo options. Kailash Range was not exactly quid pro quo option, because we limited our activities on our side of the LAC. That's why we were a little surprised that we agreed to vacate those places as part of very partial agreement, which covered only Kailash Range and northern bank of Pankung Lake, rather than waiting for a more comprehensive package or disengagement. But I don't want to second guess our negotiators. But I'll just reiterate the point that there should be no quick fix. It shouldn't happen that we have disengagement in Demchok and Depsang plains, and we say that we are back to normal. Our relations can track. That will be unfortunate.
That's a very interesting point.
Coming back to CBMs, the agreements you referred to, I was involved with drafting of and negotiating of those agreements. 1993 agreement of border peace and tranquility, along India-China. LAC, 1996 agreement on confidence building measures in military domain, 2005 protocol on implementation of 1996 CBM's agreement. Essentially, what we did was to acknowledge the fact that the early settlement of the boundary question between India and China is unlikely. So in the interim, we should maintain peace and tranquility in border areas by working on the concept of line of actual control. But we categorically rejected the Chinese claim on so-called LSCO 7th number 1959. We made it clear that what we're looking at is line of actual control, and I'll underline the word actual there. And we also made it clear that we must arrive at common understanding of line of actual control. This position, this understanding is reflected categorically in Article 10 of the Agreement on Military CBM.
Was it reciprocated, Ambassador, by the Chinese?
It's a mutual agreement. We have agreed that both sides will arrive at common understanding of line of actual control. And we also agreed on a process for arriving at that destination through exchange of maps, etc.
So what is it, Ambassador?
The Chinese went back on the understanding.
What is it that is driving this aggression by Xi to sort of change the whole dimension on the LAC? I mean, is it saber rattling, or is it?
No,
China cannot. What is it then?
It's not saber rattling. I think we need to take their claims very seriously. We should keep in mind the fact that there is a pattern in their behavior across theaters, whether it be Taiwan or South China Sea or East China Sea or India-China borders, where they engage in what is sometimes referred to as grey zone operations. That they will stay below the threshold of outright military conflict, but engage in military and economic coercion to achieve their objectives on the ground. So they're doing it very systematically. And we should have the requisite deterrence. We must build up our capabilities, including infrastructure, to prevent that from happening, to dissuade them from achieving any salami slicing, as they have done, for instance, in South China Sea, and to lesser extent, even along India-China borders.
If I can just go to back to General Menon, there are lots of reports now of China's economy imploding. Its real estate sectors in a crisis. Can it afford? I mean, does it sit with China's aggressive militaristic ambition? Can it actually afford a war? I mean, can it continue to maintain this kind of, as the ambassador says, this kind of gray zone warfare? Can it afford to keep doing that,
Uh,
General Menon?
yes. So the point is the Chinese are actually not wanting to go to war. They want to win without fighting. After all, this is Sun Tzu's basic prescription for the best use of force. And therefore, the larger narrative is we are already strong. All the small guys just listen to us. All the other guys better start listening to us. And we'll probably try and sort out our problems. But at the same time, they are casting a shadow over places like invasion of Taiwan, sorting out the borders with us, which is actually the psychological domain in which the military instrument is now being placed and utilized to affect the decision-making of political leaders. This is about the use of military force for political purposes. Not application as much, but threatening to do it. And although the Chinese economy imploding has been a narrative, especially with some parts of the West and America in particular, for a long time to come, I don't think it will happen so easily. Of course, there are tensions between being politically a socialist state, but economically tending to be a liberal capitalist one, and those tensions are come to roost. But let's also think, it is for planning purposes, that should not be happening. If it happens, is a different matter. And if it does happen, and if as long as China's economy is slowing down, there is no doubt it will be one of the vectors which will decide the decision making about whether to go to war or not. But my point is, they are not intending to go to war. They know that there are too many guys ranged against them, and their closest ally is fighting another battle out there.
Losing war.
So the point is, it will make war less likely, and that may be. But as far as we are concerned, as far as India is concerned, as far as India's military and strategic plans are concerned, we must be prepared for what we think is likely to do. And when that happens, we should not actually convene the China study group to decide as to what should be done. Immediate action must be taken as soon as possible, because that is a military necessity. The later you do, you actually close down your options. And because the bread and butter for military planning is about how do you react to when you are surprised, especially with what we call salami slicing. So
Ambassador, if I can just come back to you, we sent, 3 former chiefs of India's 3 services to Taipei this August. I mean, we had the Admiral Karambir Singh, General Navarane, and the Chief of Air Staff Bhadoria to take part in an Indo-Pacific security dialogue. Are we changing our China policy? Foreign policy to the extent like the US, we stick with the one China in public, but privately we're doing the opposite. I'm sure the general will also have something to say on this, but shouldn't we also have a joint strategy with the Southeast Asian countries which are under threat, including the Philippines, which is now reopening Subic Bay, which I visited God knows how many years ago, Clark's air base when they shut it down. What do you have to say, Ambassador? A joint strategy.
Neena, first on the One China policy. One China policy has not been reiterated by us in any joint statement with China since 2009. In fact, I recall a meeting between then External Affairs Minister, Mrs. Sushma Swaraj, and Foreign Minister Wang Yi, soon after the India government came to office in May 2014. And Foreign Minister Wang Yi was visiting as President Xi Jinping's special emissary. Our EM told Foreign Minister Wang Yi that you talk about one China policy. What about accepting one India policy? So we have been quite careful about not reiterating one China policy or saying that Tibet Autonomous Region is part of the territory of People's Republic of China. We cannot say that because Tibet Autonomous Region, as shown on Chinese maps, includes territories of India.
Yes.
So how can we say that TAR is part of territory of PRC? Likewise, on Taiwan, we have maintained our unofficial dealings with Taiwan, and for good reasons. Taiwan is a good partner for us. Even we don't recognize our Republic of Taiwan, and I don't see anything wrong in retired services chiefs visiting Taiwan to take part in some security enclave.
But China was furious. I'm not talking about us. We
We
sent a message.
Yes, they did make some noises, but that should not deter us from continuing our engagement with Taiwan. In fact, we should step up our engagement with Taiwan without in any way, moving away from our policy of not giving any attributes of sovereignty to Taiwan. Coming to your point about making a common position with countries of Southeast Asia, I think that's a very valid point. As I mentioned earlier, there is a pattern in Chinese behavior in different theaters, including South China Sea and India-China borders. We would not like South China Sea to become a Chinese lake because we have very important economic, commercial, strategic, and security interests there. So we will not accept, South China Sea within 9-dash line becoming Chinese territory that is against international law, that goes against categorical award of International Court of Arbitration made in 2016. And on some issues, we are actually projecting our solidarity with countries of Southeast Asia. For instance, you would have noticed that the recent Joint Commission meeting with the Philippines.
Yes.
Statement which came out, we extended our support to the 2016 award of International Court of Arbitration, which was a very clear message to China. And incidentally, in case of Bangladesh, though the award
Thank you. I was going to ask you about Bangladesh.
Tribunal went against us, we accepted it.
Yeah.
So we are walking the talk.
Yeah.
We are abiding by international norms. We are behaving like good international citizens. China is not doing that. And this is something we have to bear in mind. Countries of Southeast Asia, given asymmetry in size and capabilities, they're a little shy of
Nervous.
taking up China directly. But they would
No,
like.
but I think Bongbong Marcos has chosen to go.
I know. He has
taken
a strong position. So we should continue to argue in favor of open Indo-Pacific, freedom of navigation, freedom of oversight. We should build up capabilities among countries of Southeast Asia. As you know, we provided BrahMos missiles to the Philippines.
Yes.
That's the road we should keep walking, perhaps with greater,
and the ship the frigate to Vietnam. The one that
we have very close strategic links with Vietnam, and historically, civilizationally, we are neighbors of Southeast Asia.
So it could be a counter pearl.
We don't need to look at. I don't think we need to look at everything from perspective of China. We have our natural affinities with ASEAN, which are historical as also contemporary in character, and we should continue to build on those affinities, not always thinking about China or looking at the developments through prism of shared anxieties vis-a-vis China.
Yeah, thank you very much. What about Bangladesh's, being actively wooed by China also, Ambassador? I mean, you've got, they're wooing Colombo, they're wooing Mali, we all know that. But have we managed to sort of pull Colombo and Mali back into our, sort of understanding of how to deal with China?
And Neena, again, I would like to emphasize that when it comes to countries of South Asia, you will only need to look at geography.
Nepal?
You need to look at history and societal linkages, natural synergies that we have with Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Maldives. With all these countries, we have very strong bonds, which sometimes you're allowed to atrophy. So we need to develop connectivities with these areas and also have non-reciprocal arrangements. We should encourage these countries to derive benefits out of economic growth of India. The fact remains that India is today the fastest growing large economy in the world, which creates a lot of opportunities for neighboring countries. We should with generosity, reach out to these countries, as we did in case of Sri Lanka's economic crisis over the last couple of years. But I will not be complacent and say that China has lost ground in these countries. China has a very consistent, focused policy of building its presence and footprint in these areas, very actively countervailing India's presence and influence in those countries. And that is not going to go back, especially given the fact that China has very deep pockets and also ability of what is sometimes politely described as elite capture.
Yeah. I'm actually running out of time. I wanted to talk about our Tibet strategy and whether we should, have the, sort of build up the people of Tibetan ancestry that are elected members of legislative assemblies in Ladakh and Arunachal. But so, in fact, do I have a minute to? If we can actually talk about Tibet, I would really appreciate it. Very quickly, Ambassador.
Tibet, as you are aware, Tibet was our neighbor. It was the buffer between India and China until early 1950s, when Chinese PLA moved into Tibet, which changed the ground situation completely. So Tibet has been a major factor in India-China relations. What we can do in Tibet is limited in terms of domestic developments in Tibet, but we have provided sanctuary to Tibetan refugees in India. We have treated His Holiness the Dalai Lama as an honored guest in India, and I believe that we will not let Chinese reincarnation of reincarnation of incarnate lamas, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama, to succeed. And because that's something that will.
Yeah, and now the former U.S. President Barack Obama is coming to Karnataka to our with the Dalai Lama to inaugurate a new sort of monastery some new thing that they're going to do here, which is really fantastic. Can I just come back to you, General Menon? Do you think we've expended all our energy, on Pakistan and sort of, let China slip away from the radar? Do you agree with that conclusion? I mean, that a lot of people are making, because it'd be interesting to see, how this happens going forward.
So there was a
I mean,
period of time.
will we have equal focus on Pakistan and China, or does it have to be one over the other?
So there was this period of time when actually we had reached these agreements, and one of the famous sayings was, "Not a bullet has been fired for the last 30 years." And at that time, Pakistan was our obsession. The bulk of our military power was deployed against Pakistan. And all this while, and especially at the turn of 2010s, there was a frantic building of infrastructure. We also noticed it, but you know how the ability to build infrastructure and their ability to build infrastructure, there's such a vast difference. So that's why they were able to build this. But there is now certainly recognition of the fact that we need to rebalance from the west to the east, that Pakistan at best is a distraction. Our main potential adversary is China, both in the continental and the maritime domain.
I have to conclude this discussion. It would be very interesting to see whether the Chinese president does give G20 a miss, and how we tackle all our challenges going forward. Thank you very much, General Menon, for being a part of the show. Thank you very much, Ambassador Kantha. And thank you, Professor. I wish we could have had more of you next time. And thank you, viewers. Please do click on the Global Express website and continue to watch our video series.